Hail up to 1.5 inches wide is falling right now across the Texas Panhandle. Wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour are tearing through the lower Mississippi Valley tonight. And more than 42 million people are under some level of severe storm risk today, which means the exact same country is dealing with several storms firing in different states at once. Folks, tonight's severe weather is coming together fast across a huge stretch of this country, which means we are going to walk you through 5 separate danger zones before this video ends. No joke, some of these threats are underway, and a couple more just getting started. First, let's head to the biggest concern on the map, the upper Midwest and Great Lakes. An enhanced risk of severe storms is in place there through tonight into the early morning, which means this is a multiple round event, not just one line of storms passing through. Honest to goodness. Dale up in Toledo, Ohio knows this Great Lakes storm pattern extremely well. Dale says the tricky part tonight is that a second round can hit before the first one clears, which means crews and residents alike need to stay alert well past the first all clear, which means he keeps his flashlights charged and his phone volume turned all the way up tonight. Forecasters expect wind gusts to be the most widespread hazard, and some could top 80 miles per hour. Isolated large to very large hail is also possible with the strongest storms tonight, which means a couple of tornadoes cannot be ruled out either, especially closer to sunset. Northern Michigan and eastern Wisconsin saw the first round of storms early this afternoon, which means a second round is now spreading into lower Michigan later this afternoon. Renewed storms are firing tonight across northern Iowa, southern Minnesota, and into Wisconsin, which means places that saw one round of storms already could see another one tonight. Forecasters are watching for a mix of supercells and fast-moving lines of storms, which means storm mergers could combine into 1 or 2 strong to severe clusters overnight. A corridor from southern Minnesota into Wisconsin carries the highest tornado chance on today's map, which means folks in that stretch should have a way to get warnings after dark tonight. That enhanced risk zone alone covers more than 5.5 million people. Dale himself says a corridor like this keeps Great Lakes utility crews on standby tonight. A broader slight risk zone stretching from Minnesota to New York adds over 42 million more, which means today's severe weather footprint reaches a huge share of the country's population. Now let's head south, because the lower Mississippi Valley has its own storm cluster to watch. A severe thunderstorm watch is active there, and it has already produced damaging wind gusts, which means this cluster has been organized enough to knock down trees and power lines tonight. That cluster is expected to keep pushing west toward the Mississippi River through the evening. Wind gusts there could reach 70 miles per hour before the threat starts to fade, which means the danger should gradually ease after 7 or 8 o'clock tonight as the air cools. A separate cluster down in southern Louisiana is pushing north and northwest at this hour, which means that second cluster carries its own isolated risk of damaging wind gusts tonight, which means hail up to 1.25 inches is possible with the stronger storms here, which means golf ball-sized hail is not out of the question through the evening hours. Margaret, a retired nurse down in Lake Charles, Louisiana, keeps an eye on storms like these. Margaret says a fast-moving cluster like this one can catch folks off guard after dark, which means checking radar before bed tonight is worth the extra couple of minutes, which means she keeps a flashlight and a weather radio sitting on her kitchen counter tonight. Out west, a fresh severe thunderstorm watch just went up for the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles, which means that watch also covers western Kansas, and it runs until 11 o'clock tonight, which means forecasters expect storms to fire from southeast Colorado into western Kansas late today. Earl out in South Dakota says panhandle storms like these are common for early July. Scattered damaging wind gusts of 60 to 75 miles per hour are the main threat, which means that range includes some seriously dangerous isolated significant gusts tonight. Hail up to 1.5 inches in diameter is also possible with the strongest cells, which means a hailstone that size can crack a windshield or dent a car roof. No joke. Additional storms in the Texas Panhandle may expand northeastward and join this cluster, which means the watch area could effectively grow before the evening is even over. No two ways about it. This corner of the country has a seriously busy night ahead. Farther east, A dry line stretching north to south will help fire off more storms today, which means loosely organized clusters and a few supercells are both possible this afternoon. Steep temperature changes higher in the atmosphere are fueling strong, gusty downdrafts down here, which means severe wind gusts and large hail remain the top concerns through this evening. Heads up if you live in the Northeast, because storms have already popped up there too, which means southern New York, northeastern Pennsylvania, and northern New Jersey see isolated strong storms, which means a watch is not out yet. But forecasters put the odds at 20%. Honest to goodness, a hot, humid air mass is fueling these storms, even with fairly weak wind shear, which means storm organization should stay limited. But a stray downburst is still possible. Wind gust up to 60 miles per hour and hail up to 1¼ inches possible, which means a sporadic, sudden gust is the biggest concern more than a long-lived line. Farther north, a separate line of storms just north of Buffalo is drifting eastward tonight, which means the northern part of this watch area could see a locally greater risk later. That risk should increase as stronger winds aloft push that line further east tonight. Sandra, a retired librarian in Alexandria, Virginia, keeps a close eye on northeast weather too. Sandra says storms this unpredictable are exactly why she never fully powers down her phone, which means a quiet evening in the mid-Atlantic can still turn stormy without much warning, which means she keeps her porch furniture tied down just in case gusty storms swing her way. That is 4 separate storm zones so far, each one carrying its own version of tonight's threat. Down in the southeast and Tennessee Valley, a 5th storm zone is heating up this afternoon, which means Atlanta, Birmingham, and Jackson, Mississippi are all inside today's storm watch area. A hot, moist air mass down here is fueling strong, occasionally severe pulse thunderstorms, which means these storms tend to pop up fast and pack a surprising punch for their size. Forecasters are watching for wet microbursts, sudden bursts of wind-driven rain and gusts, which means localized wind gusts of 50 to 65 miles per hour are possible here too. This same 42 million person risk we opened with stretches all the way down here too. On top of all that storm activity, the heat from recent days has not backed off at all. An extreme heat warning remains in effect across a stretch of Illinois and Missouri tonight, which means dangerously hot conditions continue with heat index values climbing to 107. That warning covers south central, southwest, and west central Illinois at this hour, which means it also stretches into central, east central, northeast, and southeast Missouri. The National Weather Service office in St. Louis says this warning holds until 10 Friday night, which means this heat stretch is not a one-day event. It runs for several more days. Heat-related illnesses increase significantly whenever extreme heat pairs up with high humidity like this. Frank, a retired teacher down in Springfield, Illinois, is watching both the heat and the storms. Frank says it is a strange combination, sweating through the afternoon, then bracing for storms by evening, which means folks in his corner of Illinois need 2 separate plans ready tonight, which means he keeps water bottles in the fridge and a flashlight charged by the door. So here's a question for you. Which of tonight's 5 storm zones worries you the most? Is it the Great Lakes, the Mississippi Valley, the Panhandles, the Northeast, or the Southeast? Whichever one it is, we would honestly like to hear where you are watching from tonight. Also, type the name of your city in the comments so we can track it for you. Which means more than 42 million people share tonight's storm risk across this entire country. Now let's look ahead, because tomorrow does not offer much of a break from tonight's pattern, which means Thursday brings its own round of strong to severe storms across a wide stretch of country. One storm cluster tonight could grow upscale and track through Iowa into southern Minnesota tomorrow, which means that same cluster could keep tracking into Wisconsin and even northern Illinois. Early day storms there may bring a large hail and damaging wind risk right out of the gate, which means Thursday morning commuters in that corridor should check radar before heading out. Additional afternoon and evening storms are possible downstream from that same system too. That threat lines up along a stalled front stretching across Minnesota and Wisconsin, which means one system tomorrow could realistically produce 2 separate rounds of severe weather. Earl, a rancher out in western South Dakota, is watching a different setup take shape tomorrow. Earl says a low-pressure system near the Black Hills tends to fire storms fast out here, which means supercells are the expected first storm mode, with large to very large hail the top risk. He says the tornado threat should stay limited since the air out here is running fairly dry, which means storms should struggle to spin up as easily as they would in a more humid air mass, which means those storms could grow upscale into 1 or more large clusters by Thursday evening. Forecasters say those clusters could track from the Dakotas into the eastern Midwest overnight, which means significant wind gusts topping 75 miles per hour are possible with this system. That track carries real uncertainty, which is why forecasters have not raised the risk level yet, which means confidence could still increase as Thursday gets closer and the picture sharpens. Down in the southern Appalachians, Thursday afternoon brings its own round of strong storms too, which means East Tennessee, the Western Carolinas, and North Georgia are all in that target zone, which means storms there are expected to form over higher terrain before drifting southwest tonight, which means a concentrated damaging wind threat is possible as those storms organize and move, which means that threat lines up with a belt of stronger winds a couple miles above the ground. Out in the central high plains, far eastern Colorado into western Kansas gets another active day, which means isolated supercells are possible there too, capable of large hail and severe gusts. Steep temperature changes aloft continue to fuel these storms through Thursday afternoon and evening up in the northeast. Thursday's storm chances depend on activity drifting in from Quebec and Ontario, which means the exact timing and coverage remains a bit uncertain heading into tomorrow, which means damaging wind gust would be the main hazard if that activity does move in. Adding it all up, Thursday's slight risk zone covers more than 22 million people. A broader marginal risk zone adds close to 39 million more people into that same mix. Frank up in Springfield says he is now watching for both tonight's heat and tomorrow's storm setup. So here is how tonight and tomorrow fit together across this entire stretch of the country. Hail up to 1.5 inches is falling in the Texas Panhandle at this hour. Wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour are tearing through the lower Mississippi Valley tonight. And more than 42 million people share some version of today's severe storm risk, which means 5 separate danger zones are active in one single evening across this country. Nobody is ready for how fast a quiet afternoon can turn into an active storm night. Out of nowhere, a clear sky can turn dark once one of these clusters rolls in. It's different when you realize this pattern barely slows down before Thursday's storms take over. If a severe thunderstorm warning hits your phone tonight, treat it like the real thing, which means get to the lowest, most interior room in your home away from windows, which means an interior bathroom, closet, or hallway works, not a porch or a parked car. Turn around, don't drown applies if you see standing water across any roadway tonight, which means just 6 inches of moving water can sweep a grown adult off their feet, which means 2 feet of water can float most cars and trucks right off the roadway. Flat out. Staying off the road is the safest move during any of tonight's storm zones. For folks under that heat warning, drink plenty of fluids and stay in air conditioning when you can, which means checking on elderly neighbors and relatives matters just as much as watching the sky, which means never leave kids or pets inside a parked car, even for a few short minutes. Margaret down in Lake Charles says a charged phone matters just as much as a full pantry tonight. Comment the name of your town below, and we will work it into tomorrow's update, which means we will keep tracking all 5 of tonight's storm zones straight through overnight, which means updates will follow the moment any of these systems change direction or intensity. Your comments genuinely help us decide which zone gets the closest coverage tomorrow morning, which means this kind of multi-region severe weather night does not come around all that often, which means it is worth keeping away to get warnings within reach tonight. With the holiday period approaching, a lot of outdoor and travel plans hang on this pattern, which means fireworks shows and cookouts could be affected in more than one of tonight's zones. Roaring back with a vengeance is honestly the best way to describe tonight's storm setup. Joining forces. 5 separate storm zones rarely line up across one country in a single night. Keep your phone charged tonight, since losing power is the one thing that cuts off your warnings. Which means checking the forecast more than once tonight is honestly your smartest move. Dale up in Toledo already has his flashlights charged, and Margaret in Lake Charles is doing the same. Frank in Springfield is watching both the heat and the sky. And Sandra in Alexandria is doing likewise. Earl out in South Dakota is keeping one eye on tomorrow's system at this very hour. Good grief. 5 storm zones and 1 heat warning sharing the same single evening. Mark my words, this pattern is not slowing down before the holiday weekend gets here. Plain and simple. Tonight calls for a charged phone, a real plan, and 0 guessing. Hail up to 1.5 inches wide is falling right now across the Texas Panhandle. Wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour are tearing through the lower Mississippi Valley tonight. And more than 42 million people are under some level of severe storm risk today.